Yeah, like I said, I'm a the newest addition to this cognitive control collaborative. So I started my job here last year in January. As you know, wasn't the best time to start a job anywhere. So it was really challenging for us to start any new projects. So instead, what I did is to complete some of the projects I took from a postdoc. So here I'm going to present one of those projects. And to look at the hippocampus is all kind of another subcortical structure and its contribution to cognitive control. So here, let me see if I can turn on the print. Yeah, okay, that might be better. So here we operationalize cognitive control as a task switch. So let's take a look at this example. So imagine you have an object like a book. So the book has two features, say has its title and its thickness. So depending on the task, you might use cognitive control to or attentional control to direct your attention to one of those two features. For example, if the task is to find a paper to read, and then direction will be or attention will be directed to the cover, and then say if the task is to find something to lift this projector, and then attention will be directed to the thickness rather than the cover. In other words, the task defines what is the relevant feature or where attention should be directed to, or what is the task relevant feature. And in the laboratory, we could use the kind of a task switching paradigm to study this kind of psychological phenomenon. So here is the design we use in this study. So on each trial, the participant will first see a cue. So the cue could be either a letter G or letter O. And the cue is followed by a compound stimulus, so that there is an object in it, and then there is a human face. Then there are overlapping and translucent. For the participant, their job is to, depending on the cue, so say if the cue is the letter G, then they will respond to the gender of the face. And if the cue is the letter O, then they need to categorize the object. Okay, so similar to this book example, basically the cue as a task will define which feature is relevant and which feature is irrelevant. So we know that we're not, our brain is not passively or reacting to those different kinds of task demand or to responding to what kind of task to perform only after we know what task to perform. We are actually proactively adjusting our neural processing in anticipation of the upcoming task demand. So this is kind of the proactive versus reactive control in Top-Rivers theory. So for those kind of proactive control, the one important question is if we want to make a prediction of what task is gonna be performed next, then we need some source of prediction, right? So we need to learn this prediction. So sometimes we can learn that from statistical contingencies. So some of the previous works from Michael Wascom and from our labs, we found that the human brain is able to pick up this prediction of future task demand. Task demand is kind of a probability of what task to perform next. So the brain is able to pick up this task demand from temporal information, or in other words, by aggregating your previous experience. So in this particular study, we wanted to see other types of learning of task demand, say associations. As we know, for the tasks, in many cases, tasks are associated with spatial contexts. So say in our book example, if we add a context component to the two tasks, say like if we have one spatial context of a library and another spatial context of an office or a conference room, So kind of naturally, if we are in this library context, and then we are more likely to perform the reading task rather than the projector lifting task. But if we are in this conference room, then maybe it's more likely to perform this task than reading. Therefore, there are some at least probabilistic associations between the spatial contexts and the task demand. So this is what we want to look into in this study. And then more specifically, we have those three hypotheses here. The first hypothesis is behavioral hypothesis. So that human beings are able to learn those associations and to also retrieve those associations to guide their behavior. Then the second part is that if so basically when we encounter context, and if there is such an association exists, and then the context can be used as a cue to retrieve its associated task demand, and this retrieved task demand will be reinstated in the cortex, and more specifically in the prefrontal cortex. And finally, this retrieval operation will depend on the hippocampus. So we will, I'm going to show some results trying to test each of the three hypotheses. And first of all, this is the design the task we use, and then to further make associations between the task demand and the spatial context. So we created a 3D environment, and then in the 3D environment we have 4 different spatial contexts. So those spatial contexts are just buildings in the 3D environment. So those are the exterior and the interior of each of the 4 buildings. So to manipulate the task demand associations, so we made the participants to do more face tasks in 2 of the 4 contexts. So those 2 contexts, they will be associated with a higher task demand for face task, and for the other 2, we had a participant do more object task in those 2 contexts. So those 2 contexts will be associated with a higher demand for object task. And of course, we randomized the assignment of the contexts to a different task demand, so that different participants will experience different associations. So this whole task is a block design. So at the beginning of each block, the participants will see the cue, the exterior of the building. They will need to navigate to, and then they will be dropped into the 3D environment, and then they need to use their keys to navigate to this cued building. And after they reach the cued building, they press a button to indicate their arrival, and then they enter the building. And after they enter the building, there will be a black screen in the room, and then black screen is gonna last for about 8 seconds. So this is a critical period for us to look at a retrieval and the reinstatement of the associated task demand without being confounded by neural activities while the participants are actually doing the tasks. So this is very important in our design. And after this initial black period, then the participant will do 8 of these task switching trials here. So the proportion of face versus object tasks will be sampled based on the associated task demand. Okay. Then with this design, in order to test our first hypothesis about that humans are able to learn and use these associations to guide their behavior. So we first use a reinforcement learning model. Basically, it uses trial sequences as input, and as the output, it's going to make predictions on every trial. So how likely the next trial is going to be a face task or an object task. Then we use this prediction and the actual task demand, meaning if this is actually a face versus object task, we use their discrepancy as a prediction error and use a prediction error to correlate it to the behavioral performance. So the idea is that if the prediction error is high, it means that the prediction of the upcoming task is wrong, basically. And if we use this wrong prediction to guide our behavior, then our behavior will be suboptimal. So it should be worse when compared to the case that our prediction is accurate. Or in other words, a larger prediction error should be correlated with worse behavioral performance. So this is what we found. So in both accuracy and RT, we found the same pattern, such that when the prediction error is larger, then the accuracy for the participants will be worse. And then for the correct trials, if the prediction error is larger, and then the participants' responses will be slower. So in both cases, they will their performance will be slower if the prediction error is larger. And importantly, the prediction error is calculated based on the association between the context and the task demand. So if the subjects didn't learn those associations and didn't use the associations to guide their behavior, what we should see is a flat line instead of this significant correlations. So therefore, this results supported our first hypothesis that participants indeed learned and used those associations to guide their behavior. Then after the first hypothesis, after confirming that they learned those associations, so the next step is to look into the brain and to see where they or what processes are involved, or where in the brain they reinstated and retrieved those associations. So again, we specifically look at those 8 seconds following their arrival of this context. So our hypothesis is that after they entered the interior of this context, so this is going to be a cue for them to retrieve its associated task demand. And after this task demand is retrieved, it will be reinstated somewhere in the brain. And in order to test this reinstatement, we take the brain activities measured in fMRI. We use this brain activity pattern at the onset of the context and compare those activity patterns to the activity patterns when they perform each of the 2 tasks. So the idea is that this activity pattern, when they enter the context, it should be more similar to the activity pattern of performing its predicted tasks compared to the not predicted tasks, right? So in other words, if this context is linked to higher probability of performing a gender task, and then after they enter the context without performing any task, and this activity pattern should already be biased towards a gender task than the object task. So this will be our contrast that we use, and then we try to test this contrast in the frontal parietal ROIs from the Human Connectome project Atlas. And then one region we found is the right part of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which extend a little bit to the frontal polar area. So this part shows this contrast. And also, it does not only show this contrast, it also, the strength of the contrast at each block will further predict the behavioral performance later in this block for the 8 trials, such that if this contrast, the difference between those 2 similarities, if that is stronger, then later in that block, the participants will be even faster for the predicted task and will be even slower for the unpredicted task. So yeah, so from both this contrast and this kind of brain behavior correlation, we kind of conclude that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is involved in the reinstatement of the retrieved task demand. So lastly, we we want to look at a retrieval operation, and because of its like a significant role in memory retrieval from the memory literature, so we of course will look at the hippocampus. The first thing we did is to correlate the strengths of the prefrontal reinstatement. Like I showed in the previous slide, we correlated that with the univariate activity in the hippocampus at the time of the onset of the context. And we indeed see a positive correlation such that the stronger the hippocampal activity is, and then the stronger the prefrontal reinstatement of the associated task demand is. So that's our first hint that the hippocampus is involved in the retrieval of the task demand. But we want to further look into some more kind of hippocampal specific calculations. So one of that is the pattern differentiation. So was reported in studies from Bryce Cole's lab and also replicated in Chairman Wagner's labs. So what this pattern differentiation means in the context of our experiments is that, say we start with those four contexts. So then these in the hippocampus, their representations should be equally dissimilar to each other because there is nothing else except for perceptual differences to distinguish among them. However, say if we associate those top two contexts with the same task demand, say we associate both of them with high face task demand, and then we also associated the bottom two with, say, a high object task demand. And then being associated with the same task demand will make those two contexts conceptually more similar to each other. But for the hippocampus, in order to reduce the confusion or interference between similar items or similar contexts, the hippocampus is actually gonna further differentiate or further separate their neural representations such that the contexts sharing the same task demand will actually become more distinct in their hippocampal neural representations. And then if we measure their similarities of their neural representations, what we expect to be for the contexts sharing the same task demand, their similarity will be lower than contexts having different task demand. So that is the first thing we found in the hippocampal data. So this column shows the pattern similarity between contexts sharing the same task demand, which is significantly lower than the similarity between contexts sharing having different task demand. So okay, then we replicated the pattern differentiation using our design. But the next thing is, does the degree of differentiation linked to the hippocampal, not hippocampal, linked to the prefrontal reinstatement of the task demand? So the answer is yes, but the direction of the effect is actually, to our surprise, opposite to what we originally anticipated. Because originally we think that maybe the stronger differentiation means that maybe it will help the brain to deconfuse those two similar contexts, and which will eventually lead to better retrieval. But what we found is the opposite. Actually, the less differentiation it has in the hippocampus, actually the better reinstatement we observe in the prefrontal cortex. So this is very interesting, and our speculation is that maybe this is a spectrum between differentiation and integration. So imagine when there are two contexts sharing the same task demand, it might be beneficial to integrate the two contexts and the shared task demand into like a integrated memory trace, so that with less confusion or with more confusion in this case between those two contexts, it might actually help you to retrieve their common task demand. So that's just our speculation, but also inspired us to think more about under what circumstances the hippocampus is going to separate different memory traces, and then under what circumstances, the hippocampus is going to integrate those different memory traces, and very likely it's going to be goal-directed and involve some kind of cognitive control. So just to summarize, by integrating all the three hypotheses, this is a diagram showing what we think is happening in the retrieval of the context task demand associations. So first of all, during retrieval, the context serving as a cue will trigger the hippocampus to retrieve its associated task demand, and then this retrieved task demand will be reinstated in the prefrontal cortex, and more specifically, the dorsolateral part of the prefrontal cortex. And then the strength of the reinstatement will further mediate behavior, such as accuracy and trial-wise response time. So with that, I would like to thank my collaborators from my postdoc lab, my advisor Anthony Wagner, and my collaborators Pam, Corey, and Wanja, and also our funding agency. And of course, thank you for your attention.